It's not usual for a wife to give the introduction, but who knows someone better than the wife? So you're about tonight to hear from a fascinating man, a man of many facets, many experiences which will fascinate you. I first knew him when I met him at a Quaker conference. So I want to say to you, the most important thing about this man is that he's a Quaker, because that will tell you a lot about his ethics and the values from which he operates. The other thing I want you to know is he's a man of a great compassion with a magnificently big heart. He has 5 children and he has 10 great-grandchildren. He's an entrepreneur who has owned a prairie farm, who has gone to Nova Scotia and bought a motel, tore it down and redone it, had several restaurants, a campground, who started an investment corporation back in the 60s, which is still going strong. He's a man who was a professor for many years, so he's a teacher and a researcher. A professor of agricultural economics at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, where he worked intensely with prairie farmers around the economics of their businesses. He is an author of a best-selling book called Start with $1,000, Do-It-Yourself Investing. He is a poet, also a published poet. You will be intrigued by everything he has to say to you. He is a social activist who once ran for Parliament on the Canadian Action Party. So listen carefully, for he has much to say to you.
My challenge tonight is to explain investing and to bring everyone up to date in terms of investing now rather than investing historically, because there's been some major changes. When I set out to do an investment project, I always start with a cultural analysis. And that's how I want to start tonight, a cultural analysis. In other words, what is going on out there in the world? What does it mean? What to expect from what's happening? For instance, yesterday, Peabody Coal, actually it's Peabody Energy, which is the biggest coal company in the world, went bankrupt. And they have customers in 25 countries. They have 8,000 employees. The business started in 1833. Its subsidiary went bankrupt twice, in 2007 and again 2015, and other coal companies that were rivals in the United States, like Arch, Alpha Natural, James River, they're bankrupt too. What does it mean that this source of energy is suddenly not in demand? What does that mean? It means something, doesn't it? It has to mean something. Item number 2 last week, the Panama Papers. Wow. A front page news on every media. And my best interpreter of the public public interpreter of the meaning of money and finance. It comes from the United States and California. Her name is Ellen Brown. And she has a magnificent book here, which is best sold and many times over. And then her more recent book, this is Web of Debt, The Shocking Truth about our money system and how we can break free. Her more recent book is From Austerity to Prosperity, The Public Bank Solution. And I want to talk tonight about the public bank. We have a public bank in Canada, and I want to say a lot more about it. But here's what Ellen Brown had to say last week. She entitled her talk, War on Savings, Negative Interest bail-ins, push to go cashless. She's aware of what's happening in the world. These are things that are really happening. And on bail-ins, now most people don't know what a bailout is. It's where the taxpayers bail out the banks. Not the Main Street people, but the banks. They bail out the banks. That's where your money went. What if the failing bank is bailed in? In other words, it made a bad bet. Such a big bet in the derivatives market that it was no longer able to continue. Well, there's the senior creditors that have to be paid, and then there's the depositors that don't have to be. Because Jim Flaherty, our previous finance minister back there, he brought in permission for the Canadian banks to be bailed in, which means steal the deposits. And you say, well, that won't happen. Jim said it wouldn't happen, but in case it did. Well, it happened last week in Austria. A failed bank was bailed in. The senior creditors, they didn't get dollar for dollar. They got 46 cents per dollar. And what do you think the depositors got? Nil. You're wiped out. That's what a bail-in does. And if you want to go back to his budget, Jim Flaherty's budget, page 145, that allowed that for the two big, what I call two big banks. There's not two big banks, they're TOO big banks. They shouldn't have banks that big. Well, in the United States, for instance, the two biggest banks are JP Morgan Chase, which is David Rockefeller's bank, historically, and British American, sorry, not British American, Bank of America. And they have $1.5 to $2 trillion of deposits. You say, well, that should be safe, right? They're not going to make such a bad bet. Wait a minute. Each of those banks, the two biggest in the United States, have a risk of $75 trillion. Now, what are those bets? These are derivative bets. They're based on changes in interest rates in the future. And what we know for certain is that the bankers internationally rig interest rates. So think about you're making a bet then based on changes in interest rates where you know that they're being manipulated. I think that's risky. Well, you'd say, well, they're insured, aren't they, for $250,000, your deposits in the United States? Yes. How much money is there in the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation of the United States to bail out $1 trillion, let's say? There's 25 billion. That's all there is. So if either of these banks went under, the insurance is gone. It doesn't touch it at all. That's what happened in Cyprus in 2013. The banksters tried to go after the insured part, and people in Cyprus went into the street and stopped the banks for a week. So, is your money deposited with a Canadian bank? It's at risk. Do you think there's enough money in the Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation to pay the $100,000 that it's insured for? It's not. That's not there. Another item of news is not news. The Greek experience with the biggest European bank. The biggest European bank is Deutsche Bank. And they're in trouble. The biggest bank's in trouble, yes. But Greece is in worse trouble because the biggest bank, the German bank, is insisting on dollar for the money that they have lent to Greece to pay the bankers the interest on the loans that can't be paid. And this is 3 times in a row. And of course, the International Monetary Fund is one of those 3 entities. Then there's the global control of the world by the banksters. And they are, as Paul Hellyer puts it, the money mafia. And you need to know about them. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are conspiracy facts. I have here a study done in Switzerland of who controls the world. And they find there's 147 very tightly knit companies, and that their ownership is all held by a super entity that actually controls 40% of the total wealth in that network. And as Paul Hellyer said a couple of weeks ago, 62 families in the world own half the wealth. Well, you might say, who are these companies? I'll give you a list of the first 10. And you can tell me then, what industry do they come from? Barclays, Capital Group Companies, FMR, that's Fidelity, AXA, State Street Corporation, JP Morgan Chase, Legal and General Group, Vanguard Group, UBS, Merrill Lynch. Those are the top 10. And every single one of them is finance. In other words, they don't produce anything, they move the money marbles around. That's where the control is. And you won't find Exxon, Microsoft, General Electric there until you scroll down to, well, number 50 is China Petrochemical. There's a company that actually creates something. Think about that, controlling the situation and not creating anything. General Electric is one of my favorite demons, nemesis, whatever you want to call them. Back in the 1995, General Electric bankstered me and bankrupted me. So I took that personally for some reason. And so I keep studying them. And I can tell you right now, the official statistics on them is that when they made $26.5 billion globally profit, they paid minus $4 billion of taxes. They got $5 billion credit. That sounds like a good system, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly what the trade agreements provide to the transnational corporations. These corporations here, they provide a means of controlling the resources of the country and not having to pay taxes. They're relocated in some tax haven someplace. And that's not just foreign companies. That's true in Canada, too, in many different ways. The biggest oil refinery in Canada is the Irving Refinery in St. John, New Brunswick. That's where I live in the summertime, is on the Bay of Fundy. So I'm not that far away, just across the bay. They don't seem to make much money because they don't pay much taxes. That's because the crude oil that they buy is very expensive stuff. They buy from Bermuda. Bermuda buys from Nigeria on behalf of Irving. It's called transpricing. So the profit is in Bermuda where there is no tax. That's just an example. What else is happening here? One more thing I'll mention. Canada. We have a new government in Canada, don't we? Well, is it really new? Well, most of the Harper government is still in place. Uh-oh. That means the waterways in Canada, 95% of them are not environmentally protected. Oh. And there's been no action on climate change in this budget. None. Even though Canada upset the Paris conference by saying, 1.5% in a 1.5 degree increase rather than 2, so we don't have to work as hard at controlling our emissions. And the fossil fuel subsidies of Canada are still in place. In other words, we're subsidizing the tar sands, which are one of the worst polluting activities that we have in the country and in the world. The same subsidies are there. And in the National Energy Board, who make decisions about pipelines going east, west, north, south, who's there? The control of it was taken by the previous government, Harper government, by putting in place a majority of the members of the board. Now, they managed to buy their way on with substantial contributions, and they're still there. So, will the pipeline be accepted? Will this one be accepted? Will that one? I'll leave you to think about that. And this terrorism bill, C-51. When I saw the Liberal Party, this is before the election, was voting for this, I wrote to Justin. I have to call him Justin. We don't call him Mr. Trudeau, do we? Or the Right Honourable. Or just Justin. I wrote to Justin and I said, "What the fuck are you doing?" Those were the words I used. Well, he didn't respond. Somebody else did. They gave me a page of garbage the next day. Well, okay, one more same old, and that is the privatization of our money supply since Papa Trudeau okayed this in 1974. That's pretty serious, isn't it? Here's how serious that is. You and I and everybody in the society since 1974 have paid unnecessary interest because we didn't use our bank. All the government expenditures were funded through the banking system at interest. And that interest was compounded year after year after year. Some of the interest rates, like in 1980, 81, were double digits. Prime rate, I believe in 79 or 80, was 22%. That means our national debt escalated 22% overnight, well, over a year. That's $5 a day for each of us now, if you count the provincial debt and the municipal debt and the federal debt. $5. What, here's two people right up front here, and they pay $10 today. And there's two more, they paid $10. I paid $5. There's $25 for unnecessary interest today, and tomorrow, and so on. Now, thinking of debt is very important because every country is deeply in debt. And the average household in North America is in deep debt. How deep? According to the Federal Reserve report 2 weeks ago, the average household in the United States could not come up with $400 of emergency money. They would have to go and borrow it because they're already borrowed up and their monthly their monthly expenditures are 50% more than their disposable income. That's in U.S. In Canada, we're so much better, aren't we? 64% for us. Isn't that remarkable? Well, that's the situation every country, and not every household, but the average household in debt. Deep in debt. So far in debt that it isn't repayable. It can't be repaid. And unless you're as smart as the Icelanders are, you don't know what to do with this debt. The Icelanders said, wait a minute, we were in debt 8 times what our national product. 8 times. That means if everything they produced was paid, it would take 8 years just to pay if there were no costs of producing it. So they refused the debt. That was illegal, immoral, and so on. And they nationalized their banks. And now, the next thing they did was arrest the banksters and put them in jail. And they are in jail. And now they're going to have their bank, their national bank, that's got all the others involved, create its own money. Just like Canada used to do from 1940 to 1974. That's why these materials up here use our bank, and the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform's litigation against the government for not using our bank. That's why this is so important. This is why Paul Hillyer, in his book, Money Mafia, page 99, he says what to do about it. And on YouTube, on the talk that should go viral. I don't think it has yet, but it's on YouTube. That's what he says what to do. And this litigation, you'd say, well, why isn't the media explaining it and getting us on side about it? The answer is they never appear at any of the hearings. There have been four hearings. There's never a reporter there. They've been blacked out and told to not do it. Don't report it. Don't mention it. And despite that, we have one of the best constitutional lawyers in Canada. His name is Rocco Galati. And he took on the Harper government over the misappointment of Nadan to the Supreme Court, which was wrong. It was unconstitutional. And now his work there got a lot of coverage across the country, all right? And he was successful. A lot of his own expenses he paid to see that done. This is the kind of spirit that is required to get justice, financial justice in the country. It isn't readily available. Well, that's the situation, that's the cultural analysis that I want you to think about. I want you to also know that there's a difference between conspiracy theories and conspiracy facts. Now, I'm a financial analyst. I work with hard numbers if I can find them. I want conspiracy facts, and I've got them. I've got lots of them. I start with this one, the memoirs of David Rockefeller. In 1954, he and Bernard, the prince in Holland, got together and formed something called the Bilderberg Group, because the Bilderberg Hotel was where they met. So they called it Bilderberg Group, and they invited 100 top elitist people from politics and economics and the media. They had media, but they're all sworn to silence, and so you never heard about this. And it's met every year in secret. And you only have to see what happened after their meeting that was world shaking, to realize how empowered they are. For instance, in 1972, meeting in Norway, they invited the energy people of the world, not just Exxon and Royal Dutch Petroleum and BP and so on, but a lot of others. Yeah. What happened in 1973 to the price of oil? In 6 years, it went from $2 to $12. Huh. In 2006, they met in Canada, at Canada. And the people there included Gordon Nixon from the Royal Bank, that's the biggest bank in Canada, and Ed Clark from the Toronto Dominion Bank, that's essentially the second biggest bank. Yeah, they were there. What happened in 2007 financially, in 2008? I seem to remember we had a fairly crisis, calamity, a catastrophe, and so on. Anyway, so I follow this man. This is not a young man. How old do you think David Rockefeller is? Give me a guess here. Do you know?
He's 100.
You know. He's 100 years old.
That's younger than Bill Crim.
He's 100 years old.
Bill Crim is 2 years older than that.
Well, I ask who's the oldest one here. I better not be embarrassed myself by admitting to that. But as you get old and as you get to be in your 90s, what if your heart gives out? Well, it depends who you are. If you're David Rockefeller, you get a transplant. And what if that doesn't doesn't give you any compassion, let's say, if I'm being facetious? Well, then you get another. Then you get another. Then you get another, you get another, and another. This man has had 6 heart transplants, believe it or not. And they take place in his home in upstate New York. And I keep thinking about that as a conspiracy fact, because in his memoirs, he says populist paranoia is the part, page 405. For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we're part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. Those are his words. As I said, those are conspiracy facts, not conspiracy theories. And when you read the list of the control companies of the world, you find the top 50, not the top 10, or the top 20, the top 30, or the top 40. The top 50 are financial institutions. And of course, his is just one of those. UBS is one of, that's the second biggest bank in Europe. Deutsche Bank is the biggest one. On and on. You see, how it's easy for me to get worked up over the deliberate financial maneuvers of the political, financial, economic elite, when I realize they do mean to control the world, They do mean to overrun country after country and sabotage it with a trade agreement, like NAFTA. And our trade agreement with NAFTA is 22 years old. And what it's done for Canada is remove our manufacturing and send it elsewhere. It's taken the jobs with it. And it has allowed in the foreign countries, the transnational companies, like the U.S. Warmongering military companies, Lockheed Martin. Heavenly days, Lockheed Martin even did our census twice. I'm trying to do it again. What? What are we thinking of? Oh, we're not thinking at all. And General Dynamics is here in a big way. They just made a couple thousand, I think is the accurate number. It's not in the papers, of the LAVs. And Canada is selling those to Saudi Arabia. Wow. And Mr. Dion signed the permit. It's in the paper yesterday or the day before, front page stuff. It goes to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia will use those on Yemen, on wiping out Yemen. They're already doing it. These are the news from Yemen. That's how serious the culture, that's my cultural analysis. That's how wrong the world is moving. That's not why I entitled this talk, Investing Now. Because I do want it to be now, not yesteryear. If I go back in time to when you could trust people to a large extent, quite likely, in the finance business. If they said they'd do this for you, it would get done. If they told you this is what they'd learned, that's what they'd learned. It wasn't any chicanery or skullduggery. You could trust what they said. End of the era. It's not there now. There's no one you can trust in the financial business. No, there isn't. So, how do we answer these questions then that I raised on the poster? What is investing? Investing is putting your mind and your muscle and your money together. If you're going to start farming, or you're going to build a pyramid, or whatever you're going to do, you're going to put your mind and your muscle and your money together. This is the potent combo. That's what a business is all about. That's what investing is all about. So you may not start your own business, but you're going to have to trust yourself. That's the answer to the question, whom to trust. You. Not somebody else. Not a bank. The banks are not trustworthy. How do I know that? I watched them deregulate themselves. They used to be regulated in the 40s and the 50s and into the 60s. And then in other words, they couldn't lend for more than 4 years. And they couldn't charge more than 6% interest. So there was an industry called the trust industry, and they did residential mortgages, and they checked you out. Can you afford this? And they didn't create money out of thin air like the bankers do by lending it, by lending money. No, they had to sell GICs or CDs, certificates of deposit and so on. So if they sold to you for 5 years, this much money, they could lend you a mortgage, that money. And they charged you more than they had to pay to get the money. That was how the trust industry worked. the mortgage industry. But as soon as the banks took away the restrictions, that happened at the end of the 60s, early 70s, then, hey, they could create out of thin air by just writing, just punching the keyboard on their computer. They create money just like that. That's very, very simple. Then they create money, and they could run the trust industry down. At the end of the 70s, I remember my brother bought a guaranteed investment certificate from a trust company, and it was 17.5%. That's a pretty good rate, wasn't it? Think about the trust company having to charge a higher figure in order to have a profit. So the trust industry was destroyed by the banks. And then the wealth management part of trusts, estates and that kind of thing, were just bought up for a song. So the banks had it. Next thing they did was go after the investment banks, the securities industry, which was separate. Okay, as long as they could create their own money, they could take that in too, and they did. Now they paid quite a price. And at the time, where I was working in finance, they thought that, hey, if you can learn banking in 3 weeks, you could probably learn securities and investment management and so on in 3 weeks. You can't. And they couldn't. So they ended up having to hire out of the securities industry and the investment banking industry the expertise. The next thing they went after was the other pillar of finance, insurance. You see where this brings you financially, brings you into a perfect conflict of interest. So anything a banker says is trying to do the same thing as the casino is trying to do. Separate you from your money. You have to start thinking of that, because that's what's going on. That's the purpose of the exercise. That's the role of the financial institutions. And the 50 there that are controlling the world, that's what they do. They separate people from their livelihood, from their well-being. Of course, they have some help on doing that too. They have Monsanto to poison your food with their genetically modified organisms. And they have the occasional pandemic, and they have the Big Pharma, which is the second largest lobby organization in the world, is pharma. Finance is number one, of course, and pharma is the second. And in each trade agreement, you find that Big Pharma is there with all front feet and hind feet too. So that the CETA agreement, for instance, with Europe, means that the patent protection is extended another 5 years so that the generics don't get involved. And the studies that say how much that'll cost is $2.8 billion for all us old geezers that are on meds, prescription meds. That's just one feature of a trade agreement. And that's, of course, in the Trans-Pacific one, which Chrystia Freeland, the new minister, went to New Zealand, signed on behalf of Canada, came back and said, oh, we're going to consult with people. We're going to consult. The people I've talked to who have been at these consulting sessions say, it's not consulting. It's only one-way instruction how this is going to be good for you, and it is a lie. It's not true. This is the reality of the new government for Canada and the sunny ways and so on. You have to look at what is going down, and this is going down. The TPP there was a major meeting in Ottawa a panel that had on it some of the expertise from Canada there. There's a couple of people you wouldn't know, but I just know them by name. But one I do know is Joseph Stiglitz, who is one of the most renowned economics professors, a Nobel Prize winner, worked at the World Bank, and he and a colleague at Harvard estimated the exact cost of the of the Iraq War. $7 trillion. There's a hard number. I respect hard numbers. I respect them with Stiglitz putting his signature on it. You betcha. At the Davos meeting, Davos, Switzerland, the Economic Forum, where all the smart people of the world get together and decide what they're going to do with us next. Stiglitz met with Freeland. He said, don't do it. And when he was in Ottawa, he was the keynote speaker. And he said, don't do it. That's how he put it. That's how serious it is. That's how important this is. These trade agreements get any dispute on the environment or on human relations or health care or whatever. If there's legislation that stops them from making money, they sue. They don't sue the province or the individual. They sue all of Canada. And that's happened with NAFTA. It happened with, one of the first ones was the Ethel Corporation in Virginia that had a carcinogenic additive to make cleaner gas. We banned it in Canada. Ethel sued us. And they walked away with $17 million. And we put the carcinogen back. Now that was then, that's a long time ago, remember, this is 20 years ago. But the latest suits under NAFTA, Chapter 21, if you want to go look this up. And Chapter 21 says, yeah, they can do this. In Nova Scotia, where I hang out in the summer, we fought the New Jersey Concrete Company that was coming up to mine the basalt and take it back because environmentally it's destructive, and New Jersey didn't want them doing this, but to use basalt that's harder than granite, you use it for building roads and so on. A community of 1,500 people, mostly fishermen, some of them fishermen for 4 or 5 generations. This is Bay of Fundy, where some of the best fishing in the world is. It's where the right whales come and feed and so on. It's a very, very precious piece of seawater. When we stopped them because of our environmental laws, after we were 5 years, and we had bake sales, and we had every kind of pulling money together from not very well-to-do community, and we had free expertise of various kinds, and we stopped them. We stopped them provincially, and we stopped them federally. Then they sued us for $188 million for the lost profits. And now they've figured out how that is going to be up to $300 million for the lost profits. But that is minor potatoes. I don't know the number. But the province of Quebec is being sued by a subsidiary of a U.S. company because Quebec says we don't really want the St. Lawrence River to be filled with drill rigs to frack the shale that's underneath. And there's a video on that. It's a It's a Dutch video that's out there. And then for the Nova Scotia one, there's a German video that explains this. And it's got one of my friends, Kemp Stanton, saying at the legislature when this first came up, at the provincial legislature, he said, "Over my dead body will they do this." Well, he's still alive, but they're meaning to do it. Yes, that's how serious this is. And do you think Christia Freeland will study either of those videos? They're translated. It's not in Dutch and German. They're English subtitled. Absolutely not. That's how serious the situation is. Well, then let's say, well, okay, if you're going to trust yourself on this investment venture, what are you going to expect? You're going to expect to learn. Of course, I'm not just preaching like a professor or something. I'm saying, yeah, I'm saying this. You're going to make a mistake. Hooray! You learned something. Yes. I learned something when I started to invest. I thought that studied economics and applied economics, I should know something about investing. And I had the money I saved after my master's degree at Guelph, where I paid off my debts. And so I got married, and I took my old car. It was a 1940 Plymouth coupe. Remember, this was in 1956, so it was a little less than brand new. Anyway, we went off on an assistantship to Indiana, to Purdue, and sure enough, we could figure how to live on $100 a month. Barely. And then we realized we were raising a family now, too. That's what happens, you know. So me learning to invest by putting some money where it seemed to make sense, like on my first investment was in a company whose name I'll give you later. It was a mining company in Western Canada. And it had been prosperous, and it paid a dividend every 3 months for 25 years. It was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Well, that's a pretty high standard then, and yeah. And the dividend was a good percentage of what I paid for the stock. It was $18, and they paid $1 dividend a year. Oh. And so that was in January that I invested it. And then in February, they cut the dividend. And in July, they removed it. So it wasn't $18 stock anymore. It became $4.75 when I sold it. So I lost 63%. Everything in percentages in finance. Name of the company? How Sound. I'm not kidding you. How Sound. It's the name of a sound out at Britannia Bay in British Columbia. How Sound. Yeah. And the next investment was my own thought. I was working with a computer. This was old style computers, nothing at all like currently. But I recognized what they could do that I couldn't do longhand, you know, in calculating, and even though I specialized in mathematics, not that kind of mathematics that could compete with a computer. So I went with this company that had changed from a prosperous company into electronics. And they called themselves Consolidated Electronics. So I went to the broker to do that. He talked me out of it. He said, they don't pay a dividend, and they don't have any experience in the industry. Whereas this company, Sperry Rand, he said, they had the first commercial computer. And, they do farm machinery, they do gyroscopes for the Navy, they do all kinds of other things. And here, read this pile of material about it. So, and I thought, well, what do I know? I'm just an idiot, right? What do I know about this? So 2 years later, I gave up on that, and I sold it, and I made $1.49 total. In other words, counting the dividends, it did pay the dividends. And the next investment I made was in the car industry, because I was studying cars on behalf of a policy paper at the university, and I studied the car industry as to whether the big three would make the little car or not. That was the issue at the time. So I thought, well, I know a bit about cars, and of course I've had a Chrysler product for some time here. They sold Plymouth. The outcome was, well, the basis for buying. I wrote this down. I wrote all these down in a little black book. Okay. They'd made $5 in the first quarter on the new model. And I thought, well, by golly, that must be selling well. I make another $5. That's $10 a share, and the stock's only $80. It used to sell for $100. Oh, so I bought some at $81. Mutual funds were buying it at the time too. Another reason. What happened? Well, it went up to 82. Then it went down to 44. Even though they did make another $5, and then they did add a dollar dividend. But what was happening back home at the plant was the workers in Detroit were sabotaging the Chryslers. So you might have bought a Chrysler Imperial. By the time you got it from the showroom home, a fender might have fallen off. So labor relations, not too good. Anyway, so that loss was only 33%. Then I audited a course with a professor, and he was a rebel. He said I was questioned once about being an economist, and therefore I should know about investing. And he said I explained at this cocktail party or whatever that we talk about demand curves and supply curves, and we don't get our hands dirty with investing, you know. And then I asked, well, why not? Why don't we? You know, like John Maynard Keynes was famous as an investor, and he was an important economist. So he said, well, this was right after the war, and he said, I studied, I checked out this company, American Woolens, and they made the uniforms for the military, okay? And they had all kinds of stock in warehouses full of materials, of clothing materials, and they were all price controlled. But he thought, well, after the war, they'll remove those, and this company will make a lot of money. So he bought 100 shares, he said, and he paid, I think he paid $8 for it, $800. He said, I even borrowed the money for that. And of course, the next year, they paid him $12 a share of dividends. So the stock obviously went high. So one of the things that Professor Selchuk said struck home with me. Like, he mentioned mining. He said a mine. A mine is a hole in the ground with a layer on top. Bang. That was my how sound investment, wasn't it? Yeah. He said 2/3 of American businesses run by idiots. What? And he was talking to the engineering students who were graduating, who at that time were being fought over by the manufacturing industry. They wanted engineers after the war. You know. So I buckled down and I went after thinking, how do you analyze an investment? And you have to use the universal business equation, which applies to any business, whether it's an individual owns it, or a partnership, a corporation, a cooperative, the government. And you realize that you need assets if you're in business. And you want the assets to produce something. And you want what it produces to have a market. So you want revenue. You want revenue out of those assets, right? And you hope your costs are such that they don't exceed the revenue, so you have earnings. So you've got assets, revenue, earnings. That's the universal business equation. So this is how you analyze an investment. You see how many shares are outstanding for this investment, and you divide that into total assets in the company. You divide it into the total revenue from those assets, and then you divide it into the total earnings. And then you get then per share assets. What do you have to work with? For every dollar you invest, is there 50 cents there, or $5, or $1? What is there? And for revenue, if there's only 10 cents of revenue, you're not likely to get very much per share on the earnings end. The price earnings is going to be nil or very low. So this is what you do. And that's what I did with a whole industry, an industry called the airline industry. I studied all of the companies in the business, including a Dutch company that was the first airline. KLM Airlines was 1925 was the first, and the American Airlines and so on. So I went through this, and I come up with one company gave me more assets, more revenue, more earnings per dollar than any of the others. Then I saw what the management was doing. Well, the chairman of the Civil Aeronautics Board had taken over control of this company. And already they had new routes from Minneapolis, this was Northwest Airlines, from Minnesota down to Florida. Oh, that means all these snowbirds would have a direct flight. And management was buying stock. So I risked all the money that my conservative wife and I could put together. Remember, we've got a family going here. I've got a $100 a month assistantship to live on. I have no certain future, even if I get my degree. But we bought 100 shares, and we borrowed some money to do it, a little bit. In 9 months, we had 179% gain. And then we bought some preferred shares that were convertible. Because we were shareholders, we could get a deal and we could borrow money to do that with. That was 204% in 2 months. And I wrote in the book, Right for the Right Reasons. That's what changed my outlook from throwing in the towel and saying, I don't know how to do this, to figuring out how to do this. And I haven't changed my orientation since. That's what I wanted to tell you about investing. Then I want to ask you, what are you going to do investing now? What are you going to do? Are you going to leave your money in and deposit at a Canadian bank? Uh-oh. Oh, no. Oh, no. Will the savings that you have made have any meaning, or will they be confiscated? If we go cashless, then your money in the bank and everywhere else is just digits, which means it can be controlled by somebody else. The digits can be manipulated. And as has happened, as I said, Austria recently, Cyprus before, but Canadian banks are set up to have it happen here. And all of these countries and many of these banks are in debt, deeply in debt. Maybe you say, well, going cashless is a good thing in Japan. The latest idea is that your fingerprint, or maybe it's your thumbprint, I don't know which, is all you're going to need to press the button to spend the money. Instead of the PIN on your debit or your credit card signature or whatever. The short of that is that you're risking control of your money. And that is how significant that is. And we know that you can't trust the people that manage your money. You have to manage it. That's my message. Questions, comments? I overall should tell you one more thing about myself. That is that since 2008, I have had public talks in Winnipeg where I have relatives, immediate relatives. I have friends from a long time back, colleagues at the university, and investors that learned to invest and still are interested in knowing my thinking currently. And what my message was then in 2008 is identical with my investment today in 2016. It's got 3 red lights. Stop borrowing. Stop spending. Stop trusting anybody with your money. And there's 2 green lights. The biggie is start building community. And the second one is learn to grow food. That's my message. It hasn't changed since 2008, and I think we're a lot nearer a financial collapse globally than we have been in the history of the planet. And our environment is at risk in ways that it may never recover. And the villains can be identified, and heroes are scarce. But there are people that you can trust, what they study and what they do, what they say. Ellen Brown is one of those. Paul Hellyer is one of those. Michel Tuzadovsky is one of those. Toward a World War III scenario. But this is his classic book, The Globalization of Poverty and the New World Order. This is the best book to understand what globalization really is. And globalresearch.ca is the website. Trustworthy. And there are individuals on the internet like Paul Craig Roberts. He is absolutely commendable in every way and knowledgeable politically and economically. See, economics used to be called political economy, which put the two together, and they are together. It's just that the half-assed economists, I call them, at the universities in Economics 101. They just use Paul Samuelson's book or something, and all the nonsense in it, and it's all theoretical, and it won't ever happen. It's competitive economic theory, which is beautiful mathematically and irrelevant in the real world. So that's what if you want to browse these books, I can't sell you these, but I can offer you Paul Hellier's book and my video, Canada versus Banksters. This is my last Winnipeg talk in 2014. But if you play this at a computer, you'll find it also has other files. The Bank of Canada Act is there. COMER is the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform, their newsletter, and the court decision, but that's the previous court decision, it's not the current one. And that's 75 minutes. It was in a church, you see. And I went there because I didn't think there'd be any banksters to interrupt me, and there weren't. I actually talked about the Bible there, and I made reference to how many references in the Bible have to do with finance and economics. I think the number is 260 some. People don't think about that. I wasn't thinking about that until in my Bible it had that reference at the back. The first person in 1995, David Korten wrote this book, When Corporations Rule the World. This is golden. He has written more since, but this is the basic book in the same way as Michel Tusadowski's basic book on globalization. Explains what you really need to understand. If you'd like to browse on those, or if you'd like to buy these three, Paul Hellier's book, my video, or my ancient book. This is, I don't know how old it is, early 80s. These two editions of this book, best sold times 10 by a Canadian standard. That's not very high in the US, but in Canada, that's big. And the thinking in it, I think, is of use yet. But and the orientation isn't different than I gave you, like trust yourself to learn, to be able to learn and proceed.
You give us three things we should do. No, three things we shouldn't do, and two things we should do. But one of them had to do with community, and one had to do with growing your own food. It doesn't say, and invest your money wisely. Are you not thinking it's smart to invest anymore at all?
No, I'm saying the first word in this book is good. In this title, start. Start. I say that, and no matter what it is you want to learn. That's the professor, the educator, the teacher syndrome, I guess, that I suffer from, because I think people should be learning. And this is how you learn, is you start. You start. Now, you have to start where you are and what's up here. And what you think, how you perceive this cultural analysis, what does it mean that we are wrecking our environment on the planet that we live on? What does it mean? Well, it means you better not buy any coal company shares, right? The biggest wealth management group is called sovereign wealth, is the country called Norway. They have $617 billion of wealth that the state owns and invests. Their government said clearly, don't you dare invest in any company that uses coal in a major way. Oh. You see, even a state can use its mind, as it were, and a parliament or Congress, it could be, they could do that. And so you individually then better not be buying the likes of this old coal company in the U.S., even though it's huge, even though it's been there since 1833. If coal is going the way of buggy whips or buggies or whatever, so that's how to think about it, Ellie, is looking at, are you going to buy Exxon? Exxon is denying, or well, they're not denying because they can't. There was a leak of 5 years ago. They knew that what they were doing as the biggest fossil fuel company in the world, by far, was destroying the environment. And there are emails there that were leaked. Now, that was 5 years ago that they knew that. And what have they done since? Well, they've funded the deniers. They could get some half-cocked professor or scientist or something, or claim to be a scientist, saying, oh, no, it's just historic. You know, it's just a warm season, and then we'll get a cold season next, and so on and so on. Yeah, they funded these organizations to get the denial out there. And now they're refusing to give the Massachusetts and Virgin Islands attorney generals access to those emails. So that's an issue, the environment. Where are you investing in it? Are you investing not in coal, not on fossil fuels? What is your fuel going to come from, your energy going to come from after a financial collapse in the world? I've studied a company that I think I can depend on then if I'm still alive, and I've studied it for 30 years, so I feel like I understand it. It has done good things financially for me, and I have followed the shift in a new generation of management and so on. So I'm saying that's of interest, put it that way. And then I'm going to want food under this financial collapse, okay? And now, where's it going to come from? I'm going to grow some of my own, if I'm able, but maybe I won't be able then physically. And even though I know how to grow food, I know some food, I'm learning how to grow fruit down the Maritimes, but that's another subject. There's no room for growing fruit there because of flower bed. But, I want to say one more thing, and then I'll take your question, Chris. This is my stock and trade. I study something over time. I come to understand what the management decisions, what they're confronted with. One of my best graduate students, I would say my best, yes, let's just put it that way, my very best, was a psychologist. And he studied these farm records that I had accumulated with these farmers, 70-some farmers over a 5-year period. And I wasn't with him. He went out and sat around the kitchen table and asked them questions and made notes. And he even did the psychological thing, draw yourself farming. He said, here's some crayons and some paper. And he just coded them. So I looked at his results here, these pictures here, and now I know who that is. I know who that is too. How about these? What we did was define what a manager does. in his word, contend. This is what management does. It contends. Yes. And in my way of thinking here, how does it contend? How does it try to contend? And it tries to get production out of the assets. Get enough assets, get production out of it, and get revenue. Produce something for sale. And keep the cost down to where there's some earnings. There's a bottom line. This is how a farmer contends. This is how a business contends, no matter what they're doing. That's how I think about it. And I'm saying, if you think about it that way, then you're going to study that business. And you're going to consider yourself a part of the business. And you are a part of the business because if you're a good business, if you're a business, you do what I advise these farmers to do. Do the accounting. Do the Ackerman 5 A's. Accounting. Analysis. Alternatives. Assessment. Action. Should go the other way. Start with the little accounting. Go to the analysis, the assessment, alternatives assessment, and then the action is the thumb, really, okay, in these 5 A's. That's what you want your business to do, and you can examine it with a pencil and a piece of paper by putting it in percentages, and compare it to what their competitors and so on in the same industry. And then you can relate it to whether at this price, you want to invest in that or not. Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, it's going to be probably more of a discussion. So in your cultural analysis, you laid out very clearly the trend where we're heading as a global society when it comes to big corporations owning things, owning proprietary resources such as energy, such as food, Monsanto being one of them, big oil companies being another. There's a general underlying consensus among people that I deal with, and that base is growing every day. Everybody's frustrated. They've identified what's happening out there. They're frustrated, they're looking for solutions, and you're offering solutions here tonight. So I guess, just off the start, the big companies out there, are they still fluid enough to adjust to the global population's needs and wants, or has that been abandoned now? Because usually the way companies work is if people are not buying their products anymore, they'll change in order to still maintain their profit. What I'm seeing out there is a shift towards more sustainable communities, towards sustainable technologies, with those technologies being fostered not from big R&D companies out there, from, you name them, all the big industrial companies or pharmaceutical companies. The general consensus from the people I deal with is they're sick and tired of that. They don't want to hear it from them. They're taking action themselves. And so they're investing within a smaller group of people. They're investing in smaller communities of people that they can trust, that they can look at each other in the eyes and see that, tomato machine operating, or they can see that water harvesting device working. So you're coming to that point where there's going to be a financial collapse. I just see this, it's a very cool feeling. A bunch of young entrepreneur people that have, number one, identified the problem, number two, are taking action by pooling their passion, their knowledge, and their resources, but on a smaller scale. I just wanted to see where you think these trends are going, and if that's sustainable in and of itself.
With this future business that you're describing, I apply my same standards on any business I consult with. Customer comes first. Supplier comes second. employees, staff, comes third. The community, the environment, comes fourth. This is the owner or owners. It doesn't fit a financial company, does it? Because it isn't the little finger in finance, it's the thumb. You see what I'm saying? So that's how I'm going to judge your business or your next generation business. It's the same way. What are you doing? Are you doing right by your customers? You're doing right by your suppliers? You're going to do right by your staff, your employees. You're going to do right by your community in every dimension. And if you do that, there ought to be something left for the owner. You deserve it. But if you don't do these things, I don't say you deserve it. Like if you're just a financial company that ignores these other things, grabs the money and goes home, or you're a casino.
But do you think it's wise now to invest in alternative fuels, alternative technologies, green, sustainable living technologies on a smaller scale, and not? My worry is that huge global corporations are going to take over that technology, and the same crap's going to happen again for another 20 years.
With the trade agreements in place, I can't argue with you, but this is a reasonable expectation. But in the province of Ontario, for instance, they're just privatizing our power.
Right.
Huh? Remember where we are on energy here. We've got 2 nuclear establishments, and they're ready to be decommissioned. And we're going to recommission them and build 2 more? Even though we have to pay the Americans for taking our surplus electricity. We pay. It's not only sold under cost, it is, we pay them to take it. And next door in Quebec is cheap electricity, cheap hydro. We don't buy it in Ontario because we don't speak French. Is there another reason? I submit there is no other reason. We're not very literate. We don't parler le français in Ontario, so we don't even think about that. Why not? Their cost of electricity, we're only talking 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour. I'm paying 20 cents. I'm paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour for my electricity. And almost all of it is like delivery charge, stranded costs on the nuclear, and now we're privatizing Hydro One. You see how stupid we are, or how dominant the corporations are when, what's his name advised, he left the Toronto Dominion Bank and advised the province on how to privatize the government assets. In the same way as Tony Clement and Jim Flaherty and John Baird, when they were part of the Conservative Party in Queen's Park, sold 407, which cost us, it cost us $1 billion when we finally got it. I was using it actually in 1997, and that was the cost to the taxpayers, $1 billion. But hey, along came a consortium, bought it for $3 billion. Oh, that'll balance our books? Ha-ha. Tony Clement was ecstatic. Then, when the consortium raised the costs in court, oh no, it's legal, 99 years. And the other good Ontario example on privatization are the hospitals. The one at Peterborough was built with public money. And shortly after, Brampton built one. They built a bigger one, and it had 25% more bids. That's not much bigger, but it was a bigger one. The costs were 70% more. 70% more. $300 million difference because it was done privately. And in Kingston, Ontario, if you know where that is, like here, the plan is to privatize the building of the next one here, and that looks like a $100 million ripoff. Or if they do a bigger one, I want a bigger one. I want the Bank of Canada to fund it entirely. I want it to be world class. I want it to be as good as the Health Sciences in Winnipeg is, or the downtown Toronto. There's 3 world class hospitals side by side. That's what I want here. And why don't we have it? Because we don't use our bank. And that's why the government in Ontario and the government in Ottawa that's a heavy message, but it's the right message in my opinion. So investing in, like my neighbor invested in 3 panels, 3 sun panels. Well, there was a bribe to start, and he's got a good rate. He's got an income from it. He's managed to pay off the debt ahead of time. Well, he and how many others in the rural part of here, or the big one at Napanee, and so or out here at Kingston, the windmills on the way to Millhaven on the Taylor Kidd Highway. Yeah, isn't this the way we're going? Are we going to buy shares in a coal company or in a fossil fuel company? Are we going to say, oh, I agree, these poor guys out in Alberta, they should be rewarded. We have to honor Ralph Klein, who, as Premier, set the royalties on the tar sands. Now, you need to know royalties on good oil in Western Canada, $18, it was $18 to $21 at that time, depending on how good it was, how light it was. Yeah. He put the royalties at $1. $1. And then got Ottawa to subsidize in all kinds of things. You get an instant write-off, for this huge machine that digs up the dirt and hauls it away and so on. That's $750,000. That's written off in the first year. Can't do that in other businesses. That's what I mean about a subsidy for the industry. We have to recognize here, we don't want to keep pushing the production of coal or oil or tar sands. They are tar sands. They're not oil sands, they're tar sands. And we don't want to frack the shale out in British Columbia and Western Alberta in order to try to capitalize on the price of natural gas being higher in Asia than it is here. No, we don't want that, because it'll ruin the fishing.
So it's almost conscious
fishing is important. It's the salmon. All right, the salmon of BC is vital.
Yeah, we got to invest morally is what we have to do. And to invest morally, you have to have a social conscience, and you have to have an environmental consciousness.
So we've got to, and if you're First Nation in the West, then you're a target, because you're protesting this. And C-51 lets you stand out as a terrorist. That defines you as a terrorist, disrupting the economy, because you're defending your territory and your livelihood and that of your entire nation.
Well, the way they have us is through energy. right? And energy is the mode of enslavement. That and the financial system as well. What they're truly scared of in the opening of your talk is sort of losing that control over us. And I see the way that we can gain our sovereignty back is through sustainable living, that we don't need them anymore. And then basically we're taking off our own chains, right? And that's through wise investing, through social conscious investing, through...
And what I'm saying is that the sustainable living requires those two green lights, community building.
Right.
And we haven't done a good job on that. And supplying your own food, sharing what you understand with somebody else that wants to understand it, and vice versa around the whole circle. That's how I see a positive future for my children and their children and their children's children, which,
funny.
as Ellie said, are numerous.
2 nights ago, I had a good friend I met in 2014 from Fredericton, New Brunswick. He was coming through and he stopped off at my house, and he was invited down to Ohio to give a talk on this. It's a new software that him and a bunch of partners are developing. And what it does is it is a software developed for communities, so that whatever you produce or you produce or you produce or you produce, it goes into this software system so that your community is organized properly, where it becomes almost cashless. Because if you're producing something, it's back to the old trade system. And he's getting amazing results from investors out there that see the potential of that sort of, might as well use the technology, we have it. And if we can organize their societies efficiently using the technology in a good way, right, then we can produce these communities
And
where we don't need bureaucracy, or we don't need
a
red
hammer
tape.
lock on it like Bill Gates.
Right. And this is all open source. It's all, people add to it. It evolves naturally. And it's these positive
Open
ideas
source,
that are giving me hope, right?
Is your electronic term, yes.
Yeah. That's
Richard, you've been quiet. What do you want to say?
Well, I have a question regarding what you said earlier about a banking collapse. I think maybe that's not the words you use, but that our banking, there's another breakdown in our economic system coming soon, I think is about the way you put it, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. The question that I'm getting to is that I have pension check coming into my bank account, and I'm thinking I should change that and have them send that check to my street address rather than into the bank.
Yes.
And I was just wondering what you...
I would even say to your credit union.
Pardon?
To your credit union, I would say, if you want it.
Yeah, if the banking system collapses, it may take the credit unions down with it. I'm not sure that it would, but it's another danger. But anyway, the whole idea of changing my personal system or what it's set up for me, having the money just deposited into the bank if there's a danger of the banks. And I think that...
Well, they can steal it, is what I'm saying.
Pardon?
They're allowed to steal it.
They're allowed to steal it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what the bail-in is
That's what the bail
designed to do.
is. Yeah. So, do you agree with the thought that I have, that is, ask the, change the system for me, what I have, what the arrangement I have, and have the pension check come to my mailing address, my street address, rather than into the bank. So I would have that money.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave money at risk at a bank unless I had no alternative. If I had substantial money that I wanted to preserve on deposit, I would deposit it in a credit union in Nova Scotia where the insurance is $250,000, not $100,000. And I know that I have researched the credit unions in Nova Scotia do not invest in or speculate in derivatives, and there is a backup in the sense of their investments in provincial bonds of the province. So I would feel more secure with a couple of $100,000 in Nova Scotia in a credit union than I would in any bank. If I were in Western Canada, I would have, and I do have associates and investors in family and so on. They had, my family doesn't have substantial money, but if any of these others did, they would use the Steinbeck Credit Union because they don't involve derivatives. They don't put money at risk like that. And they foster the local businesses like the auto businesses. The new car dealerships in Steinbeck are such that Winnipeggers don't shop for a new car in Winnipeg. They drive 55 miles out to Steinbeck because they get a better deal. And those very expensive businesses are funded by the Steinbeck Credit Union. And of course it funds the farmers as well. So you could manage a credit union correctly in favor of the customer. It doesn't have to be just to the owner or the owners.
Well, of course, in a credit union, the owner it's a group ownership of the people who are members of the credit union. Is that correct?
Yes.
I didn't quite catch.
Yes.
The ownership in a credit union consists of the members of the credit
Yes.
union rather than one or two people or a small group.
That's right, but there is some central credit union like Credential and so on that in Ontario, and yes, there's some other agencies, but there's no national credit union bank, and there should be, because then they could lend a larger amount to an important business than the individual credit union can. Yeah.
Right. The other thing I just want to comment on is this, what you have, your assets, production, revenue, earnings. Now, the little bit of money I had, my asset was invested in rental property. Doesn't quite fit that kind of thing. Production, I don't know what, unless production is my ability to get good paying tenants, that sometimes is pretty hard.
Yes, it is.
Revenue
And your costs are in here, and they're not totally under control. Like you can't control what the tax authorities do, or what the rates of depreciation and circumstances are that you can. But I agree with you. Renting as a landlord is it requires management.
requires some good luck too.
And that's the production.
Finding good tenants is all.
And if you do find, then when you pay the rent, add some flowers or chocolates, you know.
Yeah. But I did have, I had 2 strokes of luck. The first thing I did to buy my first property, I bought it at a very small amount of cash because the owner who was selling it said,
He funded you.
I'll take back a
Yes.
yeah. Only to find out after I'd been there a short time that he wanted his money back. Yeah, but I don't have money. And because I put it in the property. So the second piece of luck I had was to go to, it was a bank, not the Bank of Montreal or Toronto Dominion, it was what? They have a new office next door to the Canadian Tire store in Kingston here, up by, anyway. That bank had faith in me, said, okay, we'll lend you the money. So that was my second stroke of luck, or maybe the first. And the second stroke of luck, I guess, was that at a point when I wanted to sell the property and wanted a reasonable return on it. In fact, I think I got about double the price I paid for it almost. And the real estate agent wasn't having too much luck finding somebody who was willing to pay what I wanted to get out of the property. And along comes the guy and says, I'll give you cash for it. No banks, no checks. Here's the cash. And I thought at the time, I don't think I'll mention that to anybody. I'll just take the cash and run. Where's he getting the cash?
And don't put it in a safety deposit box. Keep it in your own safe at home, or and under a loose board in the attic or somewhere else.
Yeah.
No, cash isn't trash.
Eh?
Cash is not trash, and there's a war on cash because the bankers want it all to be digitized. That makes it easy to control.
I had a comment and a question, and I think that as we're heading for this cashless society, we're going to have a harder time to use checks to deposit, and we're going to have to do direct deposit to our bank accounts.
Well,
So I just,
I hope
to
we don't
get
have
the
a
check in
cash.
the mail is probably going to be questionable over a period of time, but it may be good for now. And so to the global economic collapse, how big or small of an event do you think it would take to trigger it? Where back in 2007, 2008, it was the collapse of the Lehman Brothers? Like what if Deutsche Bank failed? How big of an event do you think it will take to actually trigger something to go global?
Well, it took a bad bet in 2007 and 8, a bad bet that AIG, the biggest insurance company in the world, they made a bet of $50 billion that the mortgages in the portfolio would not default, at least not more than 10% would default. And Goldman Sachs on the other side, the counterparty, along with UBS and Deutsche Bank and I think Morgan Stanley was involved, like a consortium on the other side said, we'll take that bet. And in fact, what happened was, what triggered it was more than 10% went under, because these were done on liar loans, because the person borrowing the money on this $400,000 house that he was going to buy, he borrowed $450,000, or because he got a crooked appraiser to say it was really worth $475. So he paid $400 for it, and he's got another $50,000 or $75,000 here to pay off the crooked appraiser. Then it goes to the bank, and the bank just whoosh, runs it through an electronic title system into a combo of bad loans from credit card loans and auto payment loans and other mortgages. And it's called a consolidated debt obligation, a CDO. And then this is millions and millions. And then this is marketed.
But that's deliberate.
Well, it worked. It worked. And nobody went to jail. Nobody seriously went to jail. No. And the settlement was a question of $25 billion for the whole country. And then individual banks were hit, and they're still being hit. But they're only hit with $100 million or $200 million. That's tax deductible, and it's only it's a week's profit.
So what you're saying is the destruction is deliberate.
I'm saying it'd have to be big enough. That was as big, that was beyond belief, you know. The bail-in of $182 billion went technically to AIG, but then it was funneled over to these counterparties. And I'm saying the system's rigged, interest rates are rigged, stock prices are rigged, commodity prices, the gold is rigged by the central banks of the world, and silver by J.P. Morgan.
But that begs the question, and I think this is what you're getting at. If everything's rigged and the money mafia is this group of guys at the Bilderberg meetings, and they're drawing up this 5-10-year plan for humanity at every meeting, what would cause a bank to go under then? Why would they trigger something like that? Is that just to reset the market for themselves? Or are they, is like JP Morgan and another bank, are they like actually buddy in the background? And their outward face is one of, competition?
I'll ask you one question. Is there honor among thieves?
No. Well, maybe.
That answers your question.
Pirates like to honor each other back in the day.
So basically,
There was an honor relative to Lehman Brothers,
Yeah.
and there was an honor relative to Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns was in a situation in 2007 in June where Citigroup asked for more collateral on these CDOs and so on, that their hedge funds, there were 3 hedge funds of Bear Stearns, and they didn't have it. So they had to collapse one of their hedge funds, and one of the others had to stop withdrawals. And so those went under, but the Bear Stearns itself didn't collapse until the mid-March of the next year of 2009. And then it went in price from $70 or $80 down to $2 overnight. Again, that was rigged. There was some huge put options on that didn't cost very much because they were so unlikely to be triggered, but they were triggered. And the outcome was, that's just an example of bank string, you see, but...
So at the end of the day, what's their end game? What's the end financial gain for these, like as you pointed out, the top 50?
Oh, well...
What's the end game?
The entity that owned the put options, I think they were at $30 or something, they would gain on that huge increase in the value between $30 and $2. You see, they probably paid 10 cents for 100 for a unit, which is 100 shares, and this would be, I think the number was, I lost it now, 30,000 at least, and that they would have paid maybe 2,000 or 3,000 for.
so it comes down to greed. absolute greed and desire to bring the control into fewer and fewer hands if they collapse everything,
Right.
then they can come up with new solutions.
Yes, the solution,
Have control.
yes, go ahead on the solution to this, because it'll be the International Monetary Fund that will come up with the next world reserve currency. Just as the U.S. controls the world through the petrodollar, if all oil is priced in dollars, U.S. dollars. That was the deal with Saudi Arabia in the 1970s. And so if it's, you have to realize that the public banks are so crucial here. Public created money. The very best, what should be done with the banks? This is hot, hot, hot. This is Michael Hudson and his colleagues, Eric Toussaint in Quebec, in France, and guy in Portugal, in Greece, and this is pure gold about what to do with the banks. But the essence of it is public banking, and public banking has to happen. Now, why isn't it happening in Canada? We joined the Group of 6 to become Group of 7, and that said then the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank for the central banks, the private ones, said, "No, you must not use any more publicly created money. You've got to use the banking system." And where else were there any public banks?
Excuse me.
Sudan?
You mentioned the Bank for International Settlements and said, no, you're not supposed to do this. The BIS, it doesn't stand for bullshit, that's the Bank for International Settlements. The BIS has no legal authority over any of the,
No constitutional authority, no.
no legal authority. They have no legal.
No.
If Canada decides to go back to what it was before
That's the issue.
1974,
But we had an intruder
We
here.
can do it.
we can do it.
Yeah, we could, it's our choice. We
But
just gotta all speak up.
there would be hell to pay, but we can either pay the hell or we can be slaves, that's all it amounts to.
Yes, but if we had a governor of the Bank of Canada named Goldman Sachs, which we did, his name actually was Mark Carney, but he came here on the behalf of Goldman Sachs to see we didn't use our own bank. And he was treated as a hero in Canada. And then he was doubled his pay when he went to the Bank of England. And while there, he's in charge of the Financial Stabilization Board, which is an offshoot of the Bank of International Settlements. What I want to get to is that where are these public banks? Well, Canada used to have one, but they don't use it anymore. Libya used to have one. And the first thing the rebels did, the CIA and M16 and Al-Qaeda, who were the rebels, they formed a bank. Yeah. Yeah. And what happened to the 144 metric tons of gold that Gaddafi had stored in Tripoli because he didn't trust the Swiss or the English or the Americans? Where is it now?
I know that was a whole twisted story with Gaddafi, wasn't it? Just
Here was a hero, a hero to his
Right,
people
to be honest. Yeah.
by so many different dimensions.
Yeah.
Yeah. But after Sudan, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Iran, I'm naming the public bankers.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why the warmongers, that's the U.S. and Canada and NATO, we're a warmonger. I remember when we were a peace country. We used to train peacekeepers down in Nova Scotia, near where I lived. And we had 14 different countries sent their peacekeepers there for training. And we were keeping the peace in Cyprus for 30 years. But we're not now, we're warmongers. And there's $20 billion in the budget every year for that. And in 2008, that was the plan of Harper and McKay, was that over the next 20 years, we would double our national debt because 491 billion would be spent for 70,000 active combat troops and 65 F-35s and new warships. And we haven't changed our mind. We're still doing it, aren't we? We've even got the obsolete submarines that won't sink. And we're going to put billions of dollars into... And we really need submarines, don't we? Now, no one has thought of any reason to have bought them in the first place. And we really need warships, don't we? Who are we going to take on here? And we need a plane that doesn't fly, I was going to say, but it does fly. That's designed to carry nuclear bombs, incidentally. The F-35 is designed to carry nuclear bombs, and Canada ordered 65. Now they're cutting back on it, but you see how stupid we are?
Speaking of our warships, I remember that Pierre Trudeau, in a conversation about, I think it was a little conflict with the United States, and he quipped, "Don't worry, we'll send our Navy after them." That's a joke. I mean, I mean, the Canadian Navy is about like that, you know, compared to the American Navy. So.
Well, that's because of Paul Hellyer. When he recognized as Minister of Defense, you had three empires here that each fought for the national budget and to get it. And so he knocked their heads together, not easily. There's a book he wrote, Damn the Torpedoes, and it explains from the inside what he went through and who was involved and so on, and putting them together. And he says very clearly, other countries wish that they could do the same thing. But no, this is what we do. We waste this kind of money because we like to kill people. We don't mind. Our bombers were, we were in charge of bombing Gaddafi personally, and the university, the power station, and the irrigation setup in the no-fly zone. And those came from Italy as a base, because Italy used to be the colonist of Libya. So they wanted the oil. So they provided that. France wanted the oil, so they provided the weapons for the Al-Qaeda and CIA and so on, contract people. That's who we are. We're warmongers. And here we got these refugees from Syria, and our C-18s were over there bombing, so we have more refugees. Aren't they? Isn't that why they're still there? I think Justin said we're going to stop them bombing, but he still didn't pull back the contract workers. That's not what they're called. They're not our military, but the same as Canadians that are still in Afghanistan. And this is what the U.S. does too. They privatize the military, and we do the same.
Contractors.
Yeah. Ellie.
I thought Chris's question was, what is the ultimate plan for the international global conglomerate? What do they think should be the ultimate way of controlling the financial monies of the world? What is their goal?
We'll get you one. Yeah.
Control is the answer, no question about that. Fewer useless eaters,
No, I mean,
enslavement of people as necessary.
but what would it look like if they were able to get their plan in place? What would it actually look like? How would it be different than now?
Well, it would be a universal police state. There would not be a war. There's not a need for war because everything's controlled. All the resources on the planet are under the control of the what do they say, 147 transnational corporations with the trade agreements that mean they control the legislatures and the judiciaries of every country. Of every country. That's what it would look like. And it would feel exactly like a fascist police state because that's what it would be. And this was well written in by a man named Michael Neild in 2004 too. And it's called the Police State Roadmap. And it's 200 pages, 700 references. Try that on an academic, where there's 200 pages. I mean, my God, if he was a graduate student and I was, his advisor, I'd say, wow, that's fantastic. That is. And that's 10 years ago. And I have a copy you can go through and check off, and that means then one currency, everything is what this lovely man would dream about accomplishing. Yes. And do you know who his right-hand guy is through all this? He's still alive. I don't think he's got a heart either. No new hearts. His name is Henry.
Kissinger.
Yes, that's who I'm talking about. Yeah. And if you think 9/11 was an accident or a slip of the NORAD or something else, you have to realize that the person first suggested to investigate, have an inquiry, was Henry Kissinger. And I said at the time, well, his fingerprints are all over it. He must know what happened. Yeah. And some other people thought the same thing, so they pulled him off. And there wasn't any inquiry. There's never been an inquiry. The one that supposedly was there was much later, and they didn't dare interview anybody that was responsible. And even the heads of the commission understood that, and admitted that later.
Yeah. The question that we haven't really dealt with so far is, what do we do about it?
What do we do about it?
Yeah, what do we do about it as ordinary citizens? And it is a political question. It is a political matter. People have to realize that, at least until now, we can talk about these things and not get arrested. And we should, through our communities, attempt to get as many people informed about what is happening and to unite in an effort to get our politicians to agree to do certain things. And one would be to use our central bank the way it should be used. And matter of fact, if we were doing that, it would start a process that would be hard to stop. It would be great. Well, it is a political matter. The Conservative Party can't be trusted to do anything on that. The Liberal Party can't be trusted to do anything about it. For a while, I thought the NDP would be, but the NDP is in such turmoil right now, I don't think it can do anything about it. The Green Party is still squeaky clean, and maybe that's the route to go. And there are a lot of individual members of Parliament who are not affiliated with any political party. If there's any way of coordinating their efforts so that things can happen.
I share your angst relative to changing the political system, because those that have the political system working in their direction really don't want to change it, or they want to change it so that they can still manipulate it. This is the ranked ballot thought of the Conservatives, which is what Queen's Park's talking about now, okay, for the city of Toronto. Is it ends up with the same thing as now. It isn't really different. The only thing that would be different would be what the NDP proposed, or what the Fair Vote people are saying. There's some entities out there now that have a design for a political design that actually means that the person you voted for is going to represent you, not represent whatever his boss says in Ottawa, but you are going to represent you in your riding. And you can sit on his shoulder, okay? And you can say, now, I asked you to do this, and so did everybody else, and we expected you to do it. Why aren't you doing it? That's the kind of speaking truth to power that you have to have. You have to have it. And the United States is such a negative example. It is just cries out for shame for any political activist to accept the process, the political process in the United States, where only 5% of the votes will be able to be counted and traced and verified. The other 95 are subject to being rigged. And then the votes are suppressed, and then the areas where they're going to vote differently, okay, we don't have as many polling booths, or we open them late, or we close them early, or we identify Joe M. Snow as another Joe P. Snow in another state, and we're saying, no, we don't count your vote, and so on. This is what's happening currently in the United States, and where you get a primary set of delegates, as in New Hampshire, for instance, where Sanders won hands down. He gets 15 delegates to the convention, and Hillary gets 15 to the convention. Super delegates that the Democratic Party choose.
You expect us to understand the American?
No, I don't. I give up on the Americans understanding it. Allie can tell you more about that. She still believes that there's honor among criminals, I think, or something like that. And I don't. I think that Hillary Clinton should be behind bars permanently. She is a war criminal. Libya is her undertaking. And her Secretary of State thing, we all know about the emails, which the FBI investigation, if it proceeds fast enough, she will not be eligible to run as a candidate for president. It's that serious. It's that wrong. It's that criminal. That's all it is criminal. Anyway, so putting the politics and the economics together is how it used to be. Political economy was what this,
That's why it was called.
and yet that's not how the universities have dissected it, so that it's, you know, it's cut and into pieces, and finance isn't there. There's business, but the financial part is only corporate finance, and it's not, doesn't get into banking or bankstering. But bankstering is what's going on. It's cheating at finance. That's what bankstering is. Just in my case, you know, I was bankstered, and I've been invested in a company that was bankstered. This is.
What do you mean when the company was bankstered?
That bankstered?
Yeah.
The company that bankstered me was named General Electric. You didn't know that they were the largest shadow bank of the world. You thought they made refrigerators and airplane engines. Yeah, they do. And you thought they paid taxes. No, they don't. And what they did was borrow from a wholesale bank in Canada, Class B, which doesn't have to get parliamentary approval to be formed because they don't have the public retail. They're only lending to other banks, a wholesale bank. It was called Bankers Trust in the United States, and it was subject to some major scandal there too. But then in Canada, they created the money, they lent the money to General Electric to buy the mortgages that Confederation Trust, Confederation Life was the largest failure of any life insurance company in the history of the world. And the trust company had my mortgage on my motel. And so I tried to get my mortgage bought separately, and the receiver would not hear of it. Wanted one deal, and the deal was with General Electric for the 451 mortgages, including mine. And so the first thing that they do, they bought them at half price, half the face value. And the next move was to show up and say, we'll pay the full amount, and we'll give you 10 days. And at that time, John Crow at the Bank of Canada had already been wined and dined by the banking industry, and they had interest rates way up there to prevent inflation. But it meant that banks didn't lend any money. They called your line of credit and so on, and they invested in government notes and government bonds, sure thing, that were paying them 12 and 14%. I advised some Americans at the time to move money to Canada and buy these government notes that paid 10 and 12%. So you can see it just strangled. That's where the Bank of Canada should have been operative. This is bankstering. This is how it happened to me. But in the other case, that was well, I could give you 3 different kinds of examples. But with the asset-backed commercial paper, that paid 2% instead of 1.5%. And if you had money, this was a mining company that had money to develop the mine, but they didn't need it all today, so they had it invested in commercial paper, asset-backed commercial paper. Oh, always been good and so on. No, just suddenly it was frozen because the assets were not there. And We're talking $31 billion here in Canada, and that was frozen for 7 months. So there's your working capital that you want to reach over and put to work. No, it's frozen. And that company ended up taking a discount and getting some of it back, and others simply waited and waited and waited, and then they got less interest as time went by. This is serious. Transair had $137 million there, and Caisse Populaire in Quebec, and they're a very important financial entity. They had $13.5 billion frozen for that period of time. This is how serious it is. This is bank string.